Welcome back, everybody. Today, I have the one, the only Richard Morris from the two Keto Dudes. Let's talk to him.
G'day.
How we doing, Richard?
Yeah, good. Down under in Australia, we're just about to start moving into winter. It's getting cold. It's going to be -3 tonight. So -3 Celsius.
Well, here in Indiana, it doesn't know what it wants to do. So we had spring-like weather. We've had 2 inches of snow last week, and it's probably going to go into spring again today. So,
yeah. But other than that, things are going well here. I'm busy in the final 2 months of my honours degree, which is I went back to university at the ripe young age of 52 to do biochemistry, and I got my undergraduate last year in July, and then went back again for another year to do an honours year, which is essentially you do a research project for a year, and then once that's completed, I'll be qualified to enter a PhD program, which I'll start almost immediately. So
that's awesome.
It's keeping me busy.
Yes. I can only imagine.
It's like my third career after. I was a software developer for like 35 years. And then became a keto podcaster for almost a full-time job for 2 years, and then ran conferences and the like, and then got the bug for biochemistry and decided I wanted to work out how all this works. So that's my potted history.
One thing I was curious about, Richard, so doing the keto thing and then going into biochemistry, has there any, or I should say once you've gone this deep into biochemistry, have any of your opinions of keto or anything changed?
No, they've gotten more strong, if anything. Yeah, so I did one of my units was human biology in first year, and one of the components of that in first semester was human nutrition. And the way that I studied for that particular exam was I wrote down, I listened to all of the lectures again. I tend to go to all my lectures. That's one thing that marks an older student. They tend to go to all of the lectures and all of the content. But I literally wrote down everything that the lecturer said that was wrong and parroted it back in the exam. So all of the things that the lecturer said that were right, I didn't need to learn, and all of the things he said that were wrong, I just parroted back exactly what they said, and I did well in that subject.
Yeah, I was curious how that would go, because if you learn something that works, that's not necessarily in the mainstream teachings, if you will, how as a student, you have to not necessarily learn what they're teaching you, but take into an account, put it on then you'd have to basically, I guess, like you said, parrot it back. So they think you're learning what they're teaching you, I guess, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is advice that Professor Noakes gives to young students who worry about the content that they're getting taught. He says you need to listen to what they say. You need to regurgitate it during your examination, and you need to understand why it's wrong. And so, for example, in the human biology section, we had a large component of why saturated fat causes cardiovascular disease, and there is, and he was able to call from a body of evidence that suggested it. We've never really had any definitive evidence that's proved it, but we have had a lot of evidence that has shown that there is no association. And the thing is, if you are looking at associational evidence and you find that there is a slight association, the strongest claim you can make is it may be causative. But if you find that there is no association, you can actually make a fairly strong claim that there is no causation involved. So that's an example of the kind of things that I had to learn and memorize and repeat.
The idea of, I'm only 41, but the idea of going to school this late seems awful. But
it's a challenge.
I can only imagine. Are you still living in Canberra?
I live in Canberra, Australia, yes, and I go to the Australian National University, which is one of the top 20 universities in the world and the best university in Australia. Not strong in biochemistry. We have other strengths, predominantly political. It's where you go if you want to end up getting a job in politics. But we also have strong medical school, strong neurobiology, and strong ecology and plant science. And most of the biochemistry here is plant-based, so it's looking at things like what can we do to increase the yield of cotton crops or wheat, barley. How do we make barley with resistant starch and things like that? So that's stuff that I'm interested in. I'm really interested in human metabolism. That's my real goal.
So you say after this, you're going to go on to your PhD?
Yep.
And what do you plan to do with that?
So that's a very good question, one in which I don't really have a good answer. It just seems to me to be that being an undergraduate, being a biochemist is good. Being a research biochemist, I mean, during my honours, during my undergraduate, I was a co-author for a peer-reviewed journal published study. Being a research biochemist is a good thing, but spending 3 years really drilling into a field of interest, I think, is going to be useful. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work with a computational chemistry lab. It's essentially, I'm doing computational biochemistry. In fact, my honours project is in computational biochemistry. And then I'll just do more of that in my PhD. But the project that I'm doing for my honours year might interest you. What I'm doing is I'm using supercomputers. I'm using the supercomputer resources of a small nation on my project, and I'm building a model of all of the atoms in the molecules of the inner mitochondrial membrane, and I'm treating them with different diets. So it's essentially all computer modeling, but it's from experimental data, so it's fairly good fidelity. And I'm looking at the properties of that membrane. This is the membrane where we make all of our energy, as it changes depending on what fatty acids you have in your diet. So that's something that's going to be relevant to nutrition, and I think it's going to come up with some interesting. It's going to come up it's certainly going to pose some interesting questions, and I think it's going to answer some things which will be good.
That's extremely fascinating, and I mean, obviously, because those kinds of tests are really difficult to do in the wild. So doing them, being lucky enough in this age to be able to do it with computers to actually get results.
Yeah, well, when you think about it, the smallest thing we can look at, we can barely look at a virus, and a virus has got hundreds to thousands of atoms in it. Using a computer, I can actually look at the atoms in a biological system. We can't do that with microscopes. So they often call molecular dynamics, which is a field that I'm working in, they often call it a computational microscope. But it's using Newtonian mechanics to work out how each atom in the system affects every other atom, how the bonds stretch and how they twist, and it factors in all of these things to give a fairly good representation of what the membrane looks like. So it's very interesting. This is also the first time it's ever been done on a complex membrane. So if you're wondering who was the first person who saw an inner mitochondrial membrane at an atomic level of detail and has two thumbs, it's this guy.
So trying to form that question, because the first person to do it, what gave you the idea? So
I've known about this. There is experimental data in rats looking at how essentially rat livers after being given different diets, and the intent of this study was to try and make some claims about whether they gained weight or they lost weight, and it was looking at omega-3 and omega-6 and and olive oil, oleic acid. So it was trying to make claims for nutrition. It didn't actually pan out. There were some results, but for the most part, it was just interesting. But for me, it was actually that experimental data was very useful because I was able to use that now at a molecular level to look at what exactly is happening and to characterize the membrane. So for me, I found this data when looking through some nutritional stuff and thought, interesting, I could actually do that simulation in a computer. So that's really what got me doing it.
So do you think that this study will help push things forward, so like in like the keto sphere, or do you think that'll push things forward for helping kind of doctors grow in what or how they prescribe or how they look at more modern diets?
This won't, and probably a lot of things that I work on won't. What they will do is they'll put together bricks that will eventually go to build a foundation that doctors will then be able to use to be able to make claims, or other researchers will be able to use to make claims, and then doctors will use those claims to change treatments. But what it does is interesting thing that came out of the study is that that a rat that has been fed mostly safflower oil, which is omega-6 linoleic acid, polyunsaturated safflower oil, looks very similar. Their mitochondrial membrane looks very similar to the wild-type rat, which is a rat fed regular rat chow. And then when I looked into it, turns out rat chow is full of safflower oil. So if we're using rats as a model to say, well, we're gonna do this experiment that's going to involve euthanizing the subject, and then we're going to use that as a model to try and claim what would happen in a human. The reason we use mice is because they live for a very short amount of time, and we can do things that are dangerous to them that could end up with you have to sacrifice the rat at the end of the experiment to be able to harvest the tissue. We do that because we're not going to do those kinds of experiments on humans. That just won't happen. But the interesting thing that my study suggests is that the rats that we use, that we feed rat chow, maybe we're feeding them just pretty much safflower oil. And does that tell us anything interesting about humans? Probably not, unless humans are eating pretty much safflower oil. So, that's really where it comes down to scientists being able to analyze the results and then say, okay, the information from rats is not necessarily reliable. And then we can look at things like, you could do a blood test and get the mitochondria out of white blood cells and do a similar kind of test on humans that's non-destructive. But anyway, that's a long way down the road. But for me, it's really just asking interesting questions that I find interesting in the membrane. It's not particularly keto specific, but it would be part of a brick that would be used to build a foundation to support ketogenic diets, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, a good amount of that goes over my head. So,
well, the thing is, I mean, I've been keto as of April the 20th. I've been keto for 7 years, and for pretty much 6 years and 9 months, and 4 days, I've been non-diabetic. So I know the validity of the ketogenic diet. That for me is an important milestone. And I notice also that at the same time that I was going through my 7th year anniversary, that the company Virta Health, which uses ketogenic diets to treat type 2 diabetics, was valued at $2 billion. So, all of these things are happening. This is a really exciting time for ketogenic diets because not only are we turning around a lot of type 2 diabetics, a disease that we previously thought was irreversible, that was only progressive. Ketogenic diets are actually turning around the type 2 diabetes of patients. And so, it's a very exciting time to be in. But what we need to be able to establish why these things happen is all of these little bricks. And we need to basically have a really firm foundation rather than somebody claiming, well, it seems to work on everyone I've ever seen do a ketogenic diet, which is a claim I can make today. I can make a claim today that just about every diabetic, type 2 diabetic that I know of who's gone on a ketogenic diet has been able to reverse the progression of their disease. That's not a scientific statement. Being able to explain why that could be the case, and that's one of those important bricks in that foundation.
Yeah, Verta Health is very interesting. I mean, so they're doing some of their studies out of Purdue, which is in Indiana where I live. So
right,
that's always pretty cool to know that they're up there at Purdue, and then I know they're doing things in Texas now as well. So
Sarah Hallberg in Purdue is doing all of that, and their study, I think they're past 4 years now, their study. So that's really interesting.
And Dr. Finney, I haven't heard anything from Dr. Finney in a while. I don't know what he's got going on, but
he's a very wealthy man now, and he deserves to be. He essentially came up with all of this stuff. I should say I've been ketogenic for 7 years and 4 days. It's been 7 years, 1 month, and 4 days pretty much since I first read his book. So he was the reason I ended up going on a ketogenic diet. So I have him to be thankful for. And, he would make the claims back then that they're anecdotal claims that, we've seen, we've seen a possibility of type 2 diabetes reversal. He would never say this diet definitely reverses diabetes, type 2 diabetes. But then when they actually went on to do Sarah Hallberg's experiment with people who've had type 2 diabetes for an average of 8.4 years, they were able to reverse the diabetes of over 50% of the participants. So that's just that, and that's a claim of significance. I mean, and then that's another brick upon which we build. We build an argument for ketogenic diets being a treatment for type 2 diabetes. And so I'm grateful not only that he wrote the book, but also that he supported that study and that Sarah ran it, and that it produced such positive results for all type 2 diabetics, which I am one of, or I was one of.
I never actually was diagnosed type 2 diabetic, but I mean, I had all of the symptoms, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I was like over 420 pounds. When I went in to have my, when I started the process of having a hernia surgery. So we looked at going low carb, and then I found your podcast, and that pretty much changed that. So, then I went keto that year. So you started the keto, the 2 Keto Dudes, I think it was like around April of 2016.
I think we started in February, to be honest. That was like when Carl first started at it. But I'm not absolutely sure. You might be right, but I vaguely recollect that it was towards the beginning of the year, and Carl had been keto for like maybe a week or 2 weeks when we recorded the first episode, and the reason we did it was because he tells this story that I was on Facebook, taking victory laps about how I'd reversed diabetes, doing the opposite of everything that the dietitians would have me do, and he was interested in this, but he was a professional podcaster. He's been podcasting since 2002, and he decided he'd not only try the ketogenic diet, but to try and stick him to the diet, he would do a podcast about it. And he asked me to be involved in it because he didn't understand the science, and he wanted both. So the way that these podcasts work is you have an everyman who asks the questions as a proxy for the audience. So when the audience is listening to a podcast and they're thinking, I wonder how that works, that's the point where Carl automatically knows to go in and ask the question, and then I'd try and give as best an answer as I could. And so we started that. I promised to do 10 episodes. We ended up doing 200. I promised to do 10 episodes for him, and then I was, I guess, I was just enjoying the process, but realizing I needed to understand more about how this works. And so that's really what got me into biochemistry, to reading as much of the literature as I could on the subject, and then realizing, well, I really should go back to school and become a biochemist, because this is fascinating me, and I can't see that it won't be fascinating me, when I'm 100 years old. And so this is a good thing for me to spend the second half of my life on.
Because that was one of the things when I found the podcast, I found that it was easily digestible. I was able to get, even if I didn't always understand the science behind everything, especially when you had various guests on, I was able to listen, I was able to understand, and it was something that kept me motivated to stay on track. And because I'm very curious, and I do need that sort of, obvious science background to something to say, well, this is why you probably should do this, instead of, it worked for me, but,
yeah.
But I mean, it was easily digestible. So you could give me the science and I could, get a basic grasp of why I'm doing what I'm doing, because especially when you're starting something as extreme, if you will, as the ketogenic diet, and you start seeing results, people in your life, your immediate family, your coworkers and such will start asking questions. And if you can't really even begin to sort of answer why, then they're going to be more likely to be worried. They're going to, I still have people like, well, you're going to die because you eat too much red meat and all that stuff. So,
Yeah, there is a little bit of that when you first start the ketogenic diet. You're thinking these experts can't all be wrong. How is it that, a couple of guys I saw on YouTube, those guys being Tim Noakes and Gary Fettke and Finian Volek, how is it that these guys know something totally different from the rest of the world and the world of experts? And how could they be right? But, you start a ketogenic diet and within 2 or 3 months, you're no longer diabetic. And, for me, I had been diabetic since I was 38. So, this and I would get slightly better if I did step 1 Atkins, for example. I'd be a little bit better. But it was only when I went ketogenic that things really clicked into place. And then things started to make sense. And then I'm thinking, the body runs on glucose or on fatty acids. And if you eat glucose, it runs on glucose. And if you don't eat glucose, it runs on fatty acids. And learning that there was that metabolic switch between the two. And you can basically turn that switch on or off by either eating glucose or not eating glucose. And so, it's a very simple thing to just not eat glucose. And all of a sudden now your body runs on fatty acids predominantly. It makes a little bit of glucose for those tissues that have to have glucose. And it makes ketones as a byproduct of burning fat that keep your brain happy, and, and you lose the fog that you're in when you were, when I can speaking for myself, when I was insulin resistant and type 2 diabetic, that, your brain's in a fog. You wake up like you've been stewed all night and you're in a fog all day. That losing that and all of a sudden being able to focus and feeling like I can, feeling like my brain's actually working like it was 10 years earlier. And that maybe my experience of feeling like my brain wasn't working wasn't just age, but in fact it was progression of type 2 diabetes. That sort of stuck me to the thing. And then, eventually I was feeling so good, I had to start telling everybody about it. And that sort of progressed to a podcast, and then it became a conference that we had 3 times a year. And I'd go to other people's conferences, and I'd meet most of the people in the field, and it became an important part of my life. So, but yeah, it just started out not wanting to be diabetic.
Yeah, I mean, when I started, I didn't even realize I was diabetic. I knew that I was having a lot of issues. I was having leg pain that I couldn't account for. I was living on ibuprofen and allergy medicine and heartburn medicine, and you don't even realize the pain that you're in until it goes away. And you mentioned that brain fog. That day, I still remember that day when I realized it wasn't there.
Yeah.
It's an awakening. I mean, it really is. You're just kind of like, wait, I'm alive almost. You're like, I'm not sleepy. I'm not drowsy. I'm I'm clear headed, and you don't even realize how long you felt that way.
Yeah, that's exactly what it feels like. And there's a very simple biochemical answer to why it is, and it just it's just this switch that if we're healthy, and evolutionarily speaking, we're not having access to a lot of glucose. We're only having access to glucose sort of towards the end of autumn when the berries come out, or rarely when you go hunting honey. But for the most part, we're living on animals. We're living on tubers we dug up. Maybe there's certainly some structure in those, but for the most part, we're living on our reserves. We're living on our fats between hunts. So we go out and hunt, eat a lot of food, and then we're using our body fat as a reserve until we next kill something. And so that's that switch from one state to another is a normal thing. But we lose it. We lose the ability to switch quickly to and from the states. And then what ends up happening is that we're stuck in the glucose eating state. And one of the things that when you're in that state, you have your insulin is elevated to be able to shuttle all that glucose into your cells. That insulin has other effects, and one of those is putting fat in your fat tissue, and the other effect is telling all of your cells not to burn fat, and in fact make fat from any energy that they have and export it off to the fat cells. And so that process, if you are in a state where you have access to pizzas and garlic bread and ice cream and full strength Coke, for example, those you see those as energy sources. And so I remember when I was a type 2 diabetic, I used to be able to eat 2 large Domino's pizzas all by myself, and I'd still be looking for garlic bread and then having some of their brownies for dessert and washing it down with 2 liters of Coke. These days, if I have it like a fathead pizza, I'll have 2 slices of fathead and I'm absolutely full. And the reason is because we can utilize that energy directly. It's not being shuffled off into storage. So the difference is remarkable.
That's funny because I just happened to watch a YouTube video last night. It was a brief little history of Dr. Pepper. And they used to have a slogan on the bottle that was 10, 2, and 4. Okay. So like if you're feeling run down, have one at 10, have one at 2, and have one at 4. And I was like, wow, that is insane. I mean, it was on the bottle.
Yeah. And the reason for that is because you're having breakfast at 8, you're having lunch at 12, and you're having dinner at 6.
Yep.
And so what they're suggesting is don't let your insulin drop. Keep it up. Keep giving it things to keep giving it easy energy that you can use with your insulin. What ends up happening is that you end up with insulin elevated all day. If you eat, so they're proposing to have 6 meals a day, your regular 6 meals, and your Dr. Pepper pepper uppers. Okay, so what that's doing is it's like, I don't know if they do this in baseball, but in our version of baseball, which is called cricket, which lasts for 5 days and is extremely boring. When the game gets really boring, somebody blows up a beach ball and everybody in the crowd tries to keep it aloft, and it's in exchange for uninteresting sport on the field. And so it's your insulin is a little bit like this beach ball, where every time you take a little Dr. Pepper picker upper at 10, 2, and 4, what that's doing is it's just elevating that beach ball back up again. You never get to the state where the beach ball goes down and you can then start to burn fatty acids. That's it's remarkable. I had no idea they had that slogan.
I remember right around the time I was finding keto, there was a kind of like a diet trend going through my office. They were doing something where they were mixing orange juice with water. So they would have maybe a cup of orange juice and mixing it with a large amount of water and drinking that throughout the day. That was to help keep their metabolism up.
Really?
And I mean,
how?
Well, I don't know, but yeah. I mean, when everybody seems to be doing something, you're like, well, maybe there's something to that.
Yeah. But it's a beach ball. And the thing is that so insulin doesn't only, as I mentioned, is not only for shuttling glucose into cells. but it's also for this switch turning off using glucose. But essentially what it does is all of our energy we make is in the mitochondria. This is the organelle that's of most interest to me. And our ability to get fatty acids into the mitochondria is turned off by insulin. And so what it ends up happening is energy is instead diverted into making new fats and exporting it out of the cell. So literally we're in a starvation state. If you give somebody some diluted orange juice, a sip of diluted orange juice every couple of minutes throughout the day, they never burn fat. It's because their insulin is elevated the entire time. They'll go from a Snickers bar to a pizza, to a burger, to cornflakes for breakfast. All these things are elevating their insulin, permanently keeping them in a state where the only energy they can use is glucose. And so within an hour or 2 hours after eating, you've had your lunch at 12 and it's 2 o'clock, and now you've got no glucose. You've used all your glucose. In fact, your blood glucose is going a little bit low. Rather than allowing the body to switch into burning fatty acids, they're proposing to, have another sip of that diluted orange juice. Just keep that beach ball in the air.
Well, I remember
the beach ball is in the air. Yeah.
I remember that 2 o'clock search for candy and 2 o'clock search for, whatever people had, because, living that office life, people would have bowls of candy on their desks, or they'd have snacks, or there would always be like little stashes of stuff, and you would go and find those things. 2 o'clock rolls around. Oh man, I'm getting drowsy. I'm falling asleep at my desk. I better go find, the candy and such. And then that not needing that anymore was just incredible. So that's one reason I want to do, things like this, have conversations. I want, that's why I do my YouTube channel. I'm growing it. It's very small. I just want, maybe if I can help a couple of people, then I've done, try to pay it forward, I guess, if you will,
Yeah.
I learned a lot from a lot of people, and I want to push it out there. I mean, I know there's lots of content. There's so much more content now than in 2016. There's so many more products now than there were in 2016. I mean, there's almost an infinite supply of keto branded stuff in the stores now that, it's almost kind of gotten to like a parody of itself.
Right. And some of that stuff is not good for you.
Right.
It's and some of it's just perfectly fine. I when Carl and I started the show, we had a lot of people thanking us, and we tried to say, don't thank us, pay it forward, because there's no possible way that I have personally tried to thank all of the scientists who looked into this stuff and convinced me in the early days. And there's no possible way I could adequately thank them other than doing the podcast, getting out to people and helping other people along the way. And that was our theme for the first Keto Fest, was pay it forward. And that's my message to people like you who listen to our podcast. I'm grateful that you got something out of it. I'd really like to see you influence a lot of people and for them to have to pay it forward. So that's so I couldn't support you more doing this podcast.
I really appreciate it, Richard. So
no worries.
I am very sad that I didn't get to go to either of the Keto Fest that you guys had, especially that first one. That one was pretty epic. And it was, I listened to all the accounts on the podcast and everything. And I just remember being like, I want to go to those. I want to have the Science Sunday. I want to, even if I don't understand all of it, I still want to immerse myself in it and do my best to learn. And I know that I'm still fortunate and, the things that I get to do, but I still little things like that. Like it's kind of like a concert I didn't get to go to, you know what I mean?
There was a degree of FOMO around those Keto Fests. Unfortunately, 2020 came along and stopped us doing any more. I don't know if we're going to do any more, being that the podcast is on a long hiatus. But you never know. But there are lots of other people doing conferences, and after we're mostly vaccinated and we're traveling around the world again, which, we're about a year away from that all happening, then probably you'll see some more keto conferences happen. But in the meantime, there's lots of virtual ones. They're not quite the same thing. It's not quite as good as going to a cooking demonstration and getting a taste of what you just saw cooked, and
right.
All the things that are unique about Keto Fest. But I think that there's once we get past 2020 and the pandemic, I think there will be more keto conferences.
I hope so. I just don't. I'm just not sure how going forward, how big events will be, and how everything. I mean, just there's a lot of uncertainty in that. So, I mean, I'm hopeful. I mean, I want to go to concerts again. Music is a big part of my life. This is a huge part of my life because it allows me to continue my life. What else? You said you'd mentioned to me you had a conference next week. Is that going to be exciting or boring or?
It's going to. Well, it's a conference of what do they call them? These type of accountants. And they wanted to have a speaker come in and talk about keto. And the guy who runs the conference has been a listener to Keto Dudes, and so they've asked me to come and do a presentation on keto. But it's got to be really dumbed down for people who've never even thought of going on a diet. So I'll be talking a little bit about type 2 diabetes and how it sort of in the last 50 years it's gone from 1% of our population to over 10% of our population, and how our diet has effectively done this to us, and how the environment that we give ourselves through the diet that we eat has essentially set us up for this, and how to reverse out of it by essentially changing our body from burning glucose to burning fat. That's all it is. It's actually it's the naturalest thing ever. And but until you do it, when somebody first says to you, you need to get your energy from fat, not from glucose, you're like, glucose is the source of our energy, isn't it? And it requires taking that first step off the pontoon and onto the canoe.
I imagine once a lot of companies like accounting, once they realize that they're going to get more productivity out of their employees if they're more in line with a low carb ketogenic lifestyle, they're more alert, they're more aware, they're better able to function mentally. I wonder if they'll start to push that and go away from the practical advice, I guess, if you will.
So that is the beginning of this, I think. Yes, I think this is happening across industries that it's certainly, if you have a founder of a company who has gone keto, and I guess this is the thing, it's also the doctors. Most of the good keto doctors at one point were a little bit overweight and tried this diet on themselves, and that's what got them going. I think probably the only exception may be Eric Westman. He saw a number of his patients do it, and that's what got him into it. But pretty much all of the others have. It was only once they had that personal epiphany that they then decided, this is reversing all my type 2 diabetes symptoms. And I have a couple of patients who have type 2 diabetes and asked if they could do this. I might suggest that they try it cautiously and check out the results. And then when they see the results, you can't unsee that, So, and I think it's the same with people who run businesses. CEOs of large organizations, they have a personal epiphany, and all of a sudden, that made a difference to how productive I am during the day. I have 1,000 people working for me. It's added 10, 15, 20% to my productivity. What if I could add 10, 15, 20% to the productivity of my business? Wow. And, so you can see why it's intriguing.
I mean, it's really fascinating. It's kind of a cool time to be around and, and paying attention to this. I mean, you're going to have the pushback. I know, and I don't know. And I saw something yesterday, and I don't necessarily know if it was just a meme, if you will, if it was like made up, because when something new comes out, I didn't get a chance to dive really deep into it. But I know that Biden just put out a like a climate plan, and he said he wanted to cut out 90% of red meat and only have 4 pounds a year.
Yeah, I think I think that's fake news. I think
that's why, like I said, I just happened to see it last night, and I hadn't had a chance to look at it because I got to bed early last night to get up early this morning, and I saw it, and I was like, well, let me look and see if I can find something about it, and I'm like, well, I really hope that's not real. But I mean, it seemed awful extreme to be real.
So there was a conference I went to in Switzerland where Walter Willett was there. He's from Harvard. He's a famous epidemiologist from Harvard. He's also a vegetarian, actually. I tell a lie. And he and a number of the scientists at the Chan School of Epidemiology in Harvard have been doing decades worth of studies on using food frequency questionnaires and coming up with suggestions to reduce saturated fat in the diet. And of course, saturated fat is just code word for animal fat. For the most part. And so at this conference in Switzerland, there was also people like Gary Taubes was there, and Nina Teicholz was there, and Stephen Phinney was there, Sarah Hallberg was there. And we reviewed the evidence for reversing type 2 diabetes. And at the end of the conference chair said, well, I think we can all agree, and Walter Willett was in the front row, I think the consensus statement out of this conference is that saturated fat is no longer a nutrient of concern. And everybody nodded, including Walter Willett. And then like 4 months later, he brings out the Eat Lancet study, which talks about how, if we're going to combat climate change, we need to all go vegetarian. And that comes essentially out of a misunderstanding of how agriculture works. Most of the energy so for example, one thing they say is that, it takes more water to produce a kilogram of beef than it does to produce a kilogram of corn. Well, they're not equal in calories. You've got double the calories in beef plus all of the fat-based nutrients that you don't get in corn. In fact, corn's nutrient depleted compared to animals. Then the argument about animals belching methane. Well, in fact, rice paddies produce significantly more methane than cattle ever did. And then, they're talking about, well, we've got a limited space on the planet to be able to make food because human population is growing out of control. And yes, that's, we do have a lot of people on the planet, but we also have a lot of grasslands on the planet. And you can't grow vegetables on grasslands. You can grow cattle on grasslands, and the process of doing that sequesters carbon in the soil because cattle poop and they tread it into the soil. And so, and the methane that the cattle are burping out is being captured by the nitrogen fixing foods that they're eating. So it's a closed cycle. So it's not like you're digging methane out of the ground that's been sequestered there for a million years, like you are when you're digging fossil fuels up. So that's a different argument. And so when you actually look at it dispassionately and you look at it from the point of view of ideal human nutrition, you find out that seeds and grains are a really poor source of, and especially monocultures, a very poor source of nutrition for humans, and they do a lot of damage to the planet. You'd be doing much better running herds of cattle on rangelands and migrating them from place to place to manage your rangelands. So that the best person to talk to about that. This is Peter Ballestead. He's an expert in the field, and he will tell you all about it. But no, from a personal point of view, I know what happens when I eat grains. I become rapidly diabetic. So if I was forced to have to eat my sources of protein and energy from plants, which is just mostly through energy from carbohydrates, and then I'd become very sick very quickly. Whereas if I do the same from animals, I'm able to be essentially non-diabetic and have a normal lifestyle. So, from my point of view, I'm not going to be changing to becoming vegetarian any day soon.
Oh no, I mean, that's one thing that I have conversations about that sort of thing, and when you try to explain that, like 24, I think it's like somewhere around 24% of the Earth's surface is useful for, or really can only be used to, grow and
24% is not water. Pretty much.
Right. Well, of actual land mass. So 24% of the Earth is not, of the land mass is suitable for ruminant animals, and only 4% of that is for monoculture, right? Something along those lines. Those numbers might be a little bit off a little, but the gist of it. So
yeah,
there's a lot more room on the planet to grow cattle than there is to grow corn. And then one thing I've always looked at too, when you're looking at corn and any kind of product that we're utilizing, is it has to be enriched, which means coming out of the ground, it's not good enough for us to survive on. We have to do something else to it.
Yeah. You have to add iron filings to your cornflakes for breakfast.
And then people go that I've seen like TikToks and stuff, and people are like, there's iron shavings and metal shavings in my cereal. Well,
there certainly is. If you grind up a bunch of cornflakes with water and then into a slurry, and then you put a magnet on the bottom of it, and you leave it overnight, and you pour off the stuff on the top, what you'll end up with is all the iron filings in the bottom of it. Yeah.
We did that in middle school.
Supplementation.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of iron in beef.
Oh yeah.
So, the thing is that people don't like to face the fact that we're actually animals. We're mammals, and the raw materials necessary to make mammals comes from other mammals. So, so if you want the best possible nutrition, then mammal meat, cows, sheep, goats, they're ideal. Then the ruminants that essentially have very few essential nutrients that they need. They generate it all from their bacterial multiple stomachs. And then secondly, you monogastrics like pigs, and probably next best. And then you'd look at you'd look at maybe birds like chicken, duck, goose, as maybe lizards if you live in outback Australia, for example, goannas, for example, kangaroos. These are all animals that have concentrated all of the nutrients from their environment specific to their needs. And if we want to go out and forage like a gorilla and eat 23 hours a day, then that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is to eat something that's done all of that hard work for you, and that's in the case of mammals, they've concentrated all of the nutrients necessary to build mammals. And so if you're thinking, what is the best thing for me to eat in order to adequately support my nutrition, then an animal that has already concentrated all of those from its environment is probably ideal. So
it seems so
simple. Sense, right? It makes too much sense.
Yeah, I kind of think that, and I imagine that humans have probably always been kind of willfully ignorant when it comes to a lot of different things. Not necessarily always with nutrition and what we eat, but I think that we always, obviously human history has a way of repeating itself. So, whether or not it's food related or whatever, we always want to be the best that we can be. And I think people try to be, all the vegetarian, all the vegan, everything is coming from a good place, if you will.
Agreed. I totally agree. And I have no fight with vegan, really at all. I mean, I've tried keto vegan, and it was a lot of hard work, but it was possible to do it. I had to be over lacto, so eat eggs and milk, dairy, but I was able to do it. I have no fight with a vegan at all. I have a fight with people who industrialize food production, like breakfast cereals, and fortify it, and what they're serving is somebody's immediate need for, I don't want to be hungry, and that immediate need doesn't serve their long-term goals for correctly running the body. So and in the case of because we've industrialized production of all of these grains, if you look at the components of a box of cereal, for example, and look at what it costs the manufacturer, what each element in that box costs the manufacturer, the ink on the outside of the box costs more than the food content that's in the box, because it's industrialized, it's so cheaply produced. So the problem is that most of us are thinking, well, I just don't want to be hungry, so I'll eat that box of cereal. And when we learn a little bit about the effect of doing that for several decades on a body that's able to become type 2 diabetic, your outcome several decades down the road is losing lower extremity amputation, losing fingers and toes, diabetic kidney disease, diabetic blindness, atherosclerosis, eventually cardiovascular disease, and heart attacks and strokes. And so, the outcomes become very serious over a long period of time. But as far as the manufacturer is concerned, they're just making people not hungry by giving them something that makes them not hungry. And nobody's looking further down the road. So that's kind of why we started the Keto Dudes podcast, was to start to talk about these kinds of issues and get people thinking about feeding their body and learning to cook, and all of these things that come along with the ketogenic lifestyle. And I guess learning to cook was one of the secret weapons. That was one of the important things. Was if you can cook your own food, you've now taken control over your nutrition. Whereas the manufacturer of that pretty painted box, if you're just opening the box and just pouring it into your bowl and assuming that they've got your best interests in heart, that manufacturer can do some pretty horrible things to you without you even knowing it. So, anyway, that was really our thesis, was to teach people to cook, teach people how to think about food, and to switch their body into a ketogenic state where they could reverse their type 2 diabetes.
And I'm really thankful for the recipe section you guys had, because that gave me a lot of ideas, and it really did get the gears turning on how to, at least in the beginning, make it seem more sustainable. Because I know in the beginning of being ketogenic, there was a lot of big changes. So normally when you're making a plate of food, you have your meat, your veggie, you have your starches, and so your plate looks full. Yes. And you see, okay, I've got a nice plate of food. It looks well balanced, and it looks how it's supposed to look. That's my idea of what a plate of food should look like. So when you go keto and you're a person who is majorly food addicted, I mean, let's be real. I was over 400 pounds. That was a thing. I mean, still to this day,
you don't get there without enjoying a meal.
No, I mean, even to this day, like, I still struggle with food quantity, and if I look at something, it has to be enough food. I feel like I'm getting the value out of the food, and that's still something that I struggle with day to day. I don't know if that will ever go away, but especially in the beginning when I was putting together, plates of food for the family, I have broccoli and I have steak. Well, that doesn't look like enough food. How is this supposed to fill me up? How is this supposed to give me everything? I don't have my mashed potatoes. I don't have my macaroni and cheese. How is this supposed to satiate me? And how am I going to move forward? So with the recipe section that you guys had in every one of your episodes, it gave an idea on what I could do to further make my lifestyle sustainable. And I mean, I've been 5 years now, almost 5, because I started in September of 2016.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, well over 100 pounds. You even mentioned me on that the 100th episode. So,
yeah, we did, I think. Yeah. No, I lost total 50 kilos, 100, a little bit over 100 pounds, 110 pounds. And then pretty much lost that after 6 months or so. And then I sort of wavered along between, I'd sort of like put on 10 pounds, lose 10 pounds, put on 10 pounds. So my body got to the point where it reached a new plateau, a new homeostasis. And I didn't see any reason to get off it because I was eating till I was satiated. I have enough energy to be able to, I mean, I cycle my bike 14K a day. I have enough energy to be able to do all the functional things I care about in life. So I think I could probably, I'm currently sitting on 110 kilos. And I think, and that a lot of that's COVID weight. I think I could probably get down to, the point where I couldn't lose any more weight was about 103 kilos. I reckon I could, if I really starved myself consistently for like 3 months, ate only protein, no fat, no, absolutely no carbohydrate, I could probably get down to 95 kilos, but the quality of life wouldn't be worth it, So, to get, the ideal thing for me was to get my body's appetite homeostasis to do its job, to accurately tell me how much I should and shouldn't eat. And I let it set what my plateau should be. And it put me in a state where I can fast for 24 hours if I need to. Evolutionarily speaking, that, you would want to be able to survive a day of bad hunting. And so, being able to fast for 24 hours is ideal. If I got down to 95 kilos, I probably couldn't do that. Probably, I could probably intermittently eat, but I'd have to eat at least one meal a day. So, there are advantages in carrying a little bit more body fat than we think of as being, ideal. But and there are studies that show that, for example, a Danish longitudinal study shows that people who live the longest have a BMI of 28. That's overweight. So, there is good evidence to support it.
When are we going to get a new BMI like structure? Is that something that's even like in the works? Because I know that BMI was, if I'm understanding correctly, was more so to look at populations as a whole and not the individual.
Yeah, so BMI was invented by a Belgian almost 400 years ago, and it was a Belgian astrophysicist or astronomer, I guess I would call him at the time. And he was contracted to look through all of the medical data in a municipality to see if he could come up with a measure from all of the things that patients told their doctors 400 years ago. What can we find in this data that will tell us how fat they are? Because we have a hypothesis that being fat makes you prone to certain diseases, and their medical history has their diseases. And we want you to tell us from this how fat they are. And he looked through it, and it had, their age, and that wasn't really very specific. And it had which region they were in, wasn't their what their occupation was. It had their height. Well, height's not really going to tell you how fat they are. It had their weight. Now, people who are fat are way more, so maybe that's useful. And so he went through, the gender, the length of their toenails, how long it's been since they last had a haircut, all of these pieces of information. And eventually he thought to himself, what I really want is the measurement around their belly. That's what I'm aiming at. But he knew that if you could suppose that all humans were roughly cube shaped or roughly box shaped, and if you could suppose that they were as wide as they were tall, then you could say, well, if I take I know that their weight is one measurement I can use, and what I need is their volume, and then I can roughly work out what their circumference is. By doing that, he was able to come up with a guess. Okay, so he used squared the person's height, divided that into their weight, and said that's going to be a rough proxy for how big they are around their circumference. And it gave them enough information to be able to do this study. Now, this study was used by insurance companies, and then this is 400 years ago. So insurance companies have been around for a very long time. Not health insurance, but like actuarial statisticians for actuarial companies, and they had all of this data from this municipality, and they had these BMI values, and they had the propensity for these certain diseases for these BMIs. And so what they did was they then went to physicians going forward and said, we want you to give us we want you to give us the BMI of the patients. And the physicians would say, BMI, what's that? And they would say, well, it's weight divided by square of the height. And what they could have done, what they should have done, is given all of these physicians a tape measure, and then they would have had an actual measurement that would be useful. But no, because of momentum, they kept doing this thing, and now 400 years later, we're still doing this. We're still measuring using. It was essentially a technique for data mining. This astrophysicist and astronomer had come up with this idea for how to data mine physician data to try and guesstimate what people's fatness was, girth, essentially. So anyway, that's how BMI happened, and we are still using it, and it's 400 years past its use by date. So what we really should be doing is we should be doing DEXA scans and working and knowing exactly what the percentage of body fat in a person is. That would be the accurate way. We could measure them, weigh them in immersion, in and outside of a tank of water, and that would actually give us more information as well. But or even use impedance scales. They're cheap as now. You can get one of those for $100 on Amazon. We should be using that to tell us what kind of body fat people have. But unfortunately, we're still using these old techniques because there's a momentum to these things.
Yeah, and one of the things that I just recorded another podcast on Thursday that I haven't got a chance to release yet, but we were talking about basically stepping away from the scale, because the scale is one of the biggest points of failure with any kind of lifestyle shift. So if you're so focused on what the scale says, you're going to get so discouraged that you're just going to give up, where that doesn't tell you hardly any of the story. So it's only going to tell you how much you weigh, right? It's not going to tell you how good you feel because you've made the right choices. It's not going to tell you that it has nothing to do with getting off medications. It has nothing to do with all the benefits that we've talked about today. But it's one of the biggest reasons people that they fail.
Think of all the things that factor into how much you weigh, whether you've had a bowel movement, recently or not. If you drink a liter of water, you weigh a kilogram more, 2.2 pounds more. You have a liter of water, you're going to weigh 2.2 pounds extra. If you've woken up and had a pee, you've probably peed half a liter at least. So there's a lot of things that factor into how much you weigh. Another thing is lean mass. Your lean mass. I'm currently 110 kilograms total weight. My lean mass is 82 kilograms. So my body fat is right around 25%. So that's it's hard to tell from total weight how much of that is fat and how much of it is fat the person needs and how much isn't. And this is why I get back to the point of the finding a comfortable homeostasis, getting to the point where your body tells you when to stop eating by using satiation cues, because your body is integrating all of that information. Your body is integrating how easy it can get to the energy that you have stored. This is something we don't know. Some people, if the blood supply is not robust to certain depots of body fat, we can end up with body fat that has no metabolic role. So and so the appetite integrates all of that. How much energy it has access to tell you how much energy you need to eat in a meal. And it's only when we pervert that, we're literally sticking our foot on the scale to pervert that homeostasis by feeding us carbs and keeping our insulin high all day, that gets out of kilter. But for the most part, if you go on a low carb diet, you will find that you will eat less because you will be more satiated, and you will find that you will hit a plateau that your body thinks is an adequate place to stop. Now, you may look at yourself in the mirror and think, well, I don't look like that cover of that men's magazine or that woman's magazine. That probably says more about your ability to be misled by marketing than it does about your body's ideal, accurate choice of how much energy you should be storing and eating.
For sure. Because I mean, I've talked about that. It's like, I'm not going to be the guy with the washboard abs. I'm not going to be, the guy that's in the gym 10 hours a day, So to look like that takes all that work, where just making sure you're healthy just means the right choices every day. So
yeah, get your A1C down below 5.7, and pretty much you've reversed your type 2 diabetes. Your chance of heart attack or a stroke has dropped significantly. You've disassociated obesity with all of the diseases that come along with it. And at that point, once you've disassociated obesity with all of these horrible diseases like, diabetic amputation, diabetic retinopathy, heart disease, stroke, at that point, obesity is no longer a disease state. It becomes an injury risk at best. If you're bigger and you roll over on your ankle, you're likely to do more damage than if you're smaller. And that's definitely true. But it's no longer a sign of disease. It's no longer once you get your A1C down below 5.7, you are you're just as healthy as somebody whose A1C was never elevated to the tens. Did you ever have an A1C done?
I never had one prior to being keto. I mean, I imagine I may have over the course of time, but I don't have any record, or I never really remember what it was. But since I've had my A1C, and it's been 5.5, 5.4.
Perfect. Yeah. Mine was 11.2 at my worst. My triglycerides were 1,111. Now normal is under 100 milligrams per deciliter. So if you think I had 1,111 milligrams per deciliter. There's 1,000 milligrams in a gram. So I had 1.111 grams of fat in my blood per liter, and per deciliter. So I had 11 grams per liter, roughly 5 liters of blood. So I had roughly 50 grams of fat at any point running through my veins. And because my insulin was up all the time, I wasn't able to use it for energy. So where did it have to go? Nowhere. So it stayed there. It was energy parked in my veins, in my veins and arteries, waiting to be used. And my body fat at that point, the reason my glucose was high was that I'd finally hit my the limit of how much energy could be stuffed into my fat cells. So it was all spilling out into my circulation. As soon as I got my insulin down, all of a sudden that fuel is now energy. Is now available energy. Before it was just fuel that I could not turn into energy. Once it becomes fuel I can turn into energy, whooshka, all the weight came off. So, and my A1C dropped to 5.2, and it's been there for ever since. So 6 years and 9 months. So, and my triglycerides dropped to under 100, because that's just fat on its way to being used for energy. And if for some reason, if you have your insulin high and you can no longer use your fat for energy, it pools in your circulation. And when I used to get a blood test, you used to be able to see it was the blood test. The blood was milky. It was almost yellowy, milky color to it. So and that was because I was absolutely floating in fat.
That's one of the things. Like the last time I went to the GP and they did my blood, and I get excited. You get excited. It's well, what are my blood results going to be like this time? And then the last time I had the interaction was over the phone, and which is an odd kind of thing, but where we're at today. But she was saying everything's looking great, and like if you look at, I'd always ask, because they have records. I was like, well, how does that compare to last year? Well, it's going down. It's trending down. And then and she's like, well, you probably still don't want to eat red meat every day. Okay.
So ask her how it is compared to 2016 when you started this.
Well, I was seeing a different GP at that time, and I remember that GP was like, I remember he was an older guy, and he told me, he said, if you want to lose weight, you have to be in ketosis.
Oh, good.
But he didn't elaborate. I had to go and figure out what that meant, and then here we are.
Here we are. And he was right. So
you
had a good doctor. You should go back to him if you can.
And then I went back years later, and I was talking because he was also my grandmother's GP, and I was talking to him about some of the progress that I had made, and he was like floored, and he didn't even understand. I don't even think he remembered telling me about ketosis.
Yeah.
So
was you good? Yeah. So he would have had your grandmother's data as well. So he would be aware of any hereditary similarities between you and your grandmother as well. So.
Yeah, I mean, because my mom, like, she struggled with like heart attacks and strokes and diabetes and stuff, and that's like right before I found you guys and started on the path to losing weight and all that stuff. I was like, well, that's going to be my fate too, I guess. And then that's all changed. Hopefully, I mean, you never know what's really going to happen in the future, but as long as I stay on this path, I think we'll be good.
Yeah. Well, I have no intention of diverging. I'm quite satisfied here.
And that's one thing I said, like, if I would have maybe only had 10 to 15 pounds to lose or something when I found keto, I may have not have come to that epiphany. Well, this is where I'm going to be. Because I think having, so much weight to lose, it takes a lot of time, and then you have a chance to realize all the benefits. Because I mean, even still to this day, personal friends and stuff will come to me and they'll say, can you help me get started? And of course, I'll help them. And they're like, well, I don't know if I'm going to do it long term. I just want to lose X amount of weight. Then I'm going to go back doing what I'm doing. And I'm like, well, it's probably not going to work then.
Then you'll go back to where, you'll go back to where you were. Further along the path. Yeah, it's one of these things that it sounds scary making a change that you're going to do for the rest of your life. But if it's a change that you enjoy, if it's something that, I eat wonderfully compared to what I ate beforehand. My lifestyle is awesome compared to what it was beforehand.
Now, I saw that pork belly, Richard.
Yeah, the pork belly's pretty damn good. That's and I think I eat pork belly several times a month. So, and my biomarkers have never gone back to being diabetic. So, I'll take that as a comment that I should eat less red meat. Rather than an argument, because I didn't hear a cogent argument in there as to why I should eat less red meat.
I know. I mean, and you have to take that with a grain of salt. You just have to kind of, well, okay, yeah, I'll do my best to eat less red meat, even that's what I eat every day.
Yeah. Well, the ruminant meat is really some of the best lipid profiles. Monogastrics like pigs and chicken tend to have a lot of lipids that they eat, whereas ruminants, they manufacture it in their four-chambered stomachs. So, well, in fact, the bacteria living in their four-chambered stomachs manufacture it through fermentation. So, it's a much better, I think, probably more species appropriate to human diet, but. As you say, I do eat a lot of Pork belly.
Oh, it's so good. We haven't had it in a while. We kind of got burnt out. We were having it too much because I'll buy the 10-pound slab and we'll cut it down and then we'll eat it for a couple of days and then, well, we just kind of get tired. I mean, it's a sad state of affairs when you're tired of eating pork belly, but but I think I'll need to go buy one soon and make one. Put on how I make it on a video so people can see that. So. And Richard, it's been a wonderful experience sitting and getting a chance to talk to you. I mean, you're one of my heroes.
You'll be somebody else's hero. You watch.
Well, I hope. I mean, and I know that sounds like big-headed, but I hope that I can help somebody make a real change that helps their life. I mean, I don't want to be famous or whatever, but I want to make somebody's life better. And I really enjoy these conversations, because I think it helps push us as a people forward. I think, especially this day and age, having a long, in-depth conversation with somebody is kind of an undervalued thing that happens. So,
thank you for doing this. No, you're welcome, and thank you for doing this. And I wish only great things for your podcast.
Well, I appreciate that, Richard. Anything you want to tell everybody before we go? Anything you've got going on that anybody should be concerned about or excited for?
I will pop up at the usual times whenever between studies. So, but I have I have no books to sell or podcasts or anything. I am working on a book called "Why Is the Fat Man Hungry?" But that's on the back burner until I finish my honors.
So you're not going to sell us any ketones or anything like that, Richard?
I've never sold a ketone in my life.
I appreciate that. And thanks again so much for being here. And I look forward to seeing all the great things you do.
You're welcome. Thanks, Dustin.
Thanks so much, Richard.